Welcome to the Shamanic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And I'm with a very special friend, Gemini Brett Joseph of More Than Astrology. Welcome to the show, Brett.
Thanks, Gary. How you doing?
I am well, brother. It's good to see you.
It's a pleasure to see you, and it's an absolute honor to be on a show that I spend so much time listening to, man. Very much
right on, man. Well, you've definitely earned it. You have kicked up your game in the last few years, and I hear great things about you all over the place, and I'm like, yeah, I know that guy.
Trained that guy. Folks should know that I study with Gary some.
Well, I helped.
Yeah. We met in 2014. I was, still pretty new to astrology. I still am, and had been studying at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. We met at one of their conferences, and Gary was talking about all this alchemy and, these words that my soul knew, but my mind had not yet heard.
And bug in his ear.
Yeah, it blew me open, and it was cool because then tuning into your work, it brought me at that time into a journey into some of the traditional astrology and the roots of our craft. And that really brought me to actually a lot of the topic of our conversation today. It's really rooted.
I think it's really cool that you point that out, man, because, traditionally the way that this material was supposed to be transmitted was like that, right? From one person to another. And there's a reason for that, because it's not just the material. Like, you can get the material from a book. You can get the material from articles online. But what you can't get is the vibratory nature of the person transmitting that material and the experience that they have with the material that comes through on a vibrational level, right?
Yes.
That's what you can't get from hopefully you can get some of it from a book, but you definitely can't get it, just reading articles online or
or translating the ancient scriptures, and we can go back so far in Project Hindsight, which I know you were intimately connected with, and at the very beginning of your coming astrologer again.
I mean, I hung out there. I didn't do any translating. Yeah.
Okay, cool, right. But we can go back, and it's such a beautiful thing to get back to these ancient texts and translate them at this time when scriptures from all over the world were coming into one place. But if you read some of that stuff as you have, there's a lot of question marks in it, right? There's a lot of cats sitting around the table like, wait, what? Because on some level, this was a magical tradition. This was a tradition that was passed down orally and through initiation, and wasn't something that was maybe even meant to be written down. And so to get back to the oldest thing, and I love this is speaking of Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, this is a point that Daniel Jamario makes. It's like, yeah, we should do all that hindsight, but the furthest we can go back is to actually get our feet out on the soil and look up at the sky. And you and I, in our own personal devotions, I know this well about you, so I'm not afraid to put words in your mouth. We are in that practice of receiving the oral tradition straight from the stars.
Yeah, and that's why I was there. That's why Daniel just accepted me with open arms, because even though I'm not initiated in his school per se, he's like, yeah, you're one of us. You do what we do. Come on out, And so, yeah, there's a quality of it that's kind of Orphic in a sense, like, they back in the day, if you wanted to get healed, right, you would go to these temples of Asclepius, and there'd be snakes crawling around on the floor and stuff, and you would go in there and you would dream. You'd have a dream, and they would interpret the dream. And these temples weren't located just anywhere, right? They were actually located in places. And so you would be taking in the energy of that place and dreaming in the energy of that place. And that was part of the healing. And I think that what you're talking about, what Daniel's so great at doing, with all the wonderful places that he takes people, and what we're, what we're trying to emulate with the Sky Astrology Conference, and you and I do in our own personal practice, is to dream in the energies of the above, right? To dream in, and it's wild how, different stars, will show up and it'll be like, you know, for instance, you called me like earlier this spring. I think I was watching a movie or something with my wife, you know, or something, and I hear Brett's, and I was like, oh, it's Brett. And I was like, yeah, I'm watching a movie, you know, I won't interrupt the experience for, you know, for the person I'm with, and I'll just, and then I hear you saying something about, yeah, I might have some work for you. And I'm like, but, you know, in that process of like having to step up and like perform, you know, pretty quickly on the spot, I got sort of reintroduced to this star Antares, because that's what was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the year, this star kept showing up. People kept coming to me with that star in their chart. And then I was looking, I was like, oh my God, there's this awesome alignment, you know, happening later in the year where you know, the sun and Jupiter and Mercury are all going to line up with the star. And I worked some magic with that. And I had this talisman on my altar, and all of a sudden, boom, you know, all this work comes falling in my lap, you know, it's because there's my midheaven right there. And it's like, holy crap. And it's like, I wasn't the architect of that.
Yeah.
It was like that star reached out to me through people, you know what I'm saying? As much as anything I was doing.
My descendant is 9.5 Sag.
Yeah, so
so that star lives right there. And
here I got this cat who's already, you know, he's one of that star's people, you know, and he gives me a call, and then I go, oh wow, that star's involved in the stuff that I just happened to be teaching about, even though I didn't know I was teaching about it just now. And then and the ball just keeps rolling. I mean, like, that's the beauty of being a true sky keeper, you know.
I've been thinking about it a lot lately, because you know, when astrology first kind of poured into me from the heavens, Jupiter was at my Gemini ascendant, and then when Jupiter found its way to the roots of my chart, to the IC, that's when I started my journey with you, and I ended up studying in Chris Brennan's Hellenistic course, and just journeying into some of the ancient astrology, the roots, and now Jupiter is up here at my descendant. So it's really cool to hear that story and to be on your podcast, and, you know, in relationship. And
you're coming out of the underworld back up into the regular world. They're gonna normalize your behind.
Okay. You know, you and I were speaking just yesterday and getting ready for this about Procyon and some experiences that you've been having with that star. And I walked out of a thing. I went yesterday to a friend was teaching about herbology and plants and planets and in San Francisco. And I walked out of there, and there's one star, and it's Procyon just right there. I was like, wow, you know.
Like, oh, you got me. Yeah. That relationship, that very personal relationship with the sky and with our art. I mean, that's where it's at, man. And that's what you get when you study one-on-one with another person who's been doing this a long time, is you get that personal relationship. You get that transmission of personal experience and like that they've absorbed, you know, through these different experiences. It comes through. And so, yeah, I think it's wonderful that, you know, you've had, you know, different experiences with different people, and that, you know, I really love that you're, you know, taking a multi-pronged approach. You know, a lot of people, they get sort of, you know, specialized in one area or whatever, and that's fine. But like, for me, like being, you know, able to like embrace a lot of different aspects and not just that, but to integrate them into something and then make it your own. I mean, that's art, you know, and I love it when I see people doing that. And I've really seen you doing that over this last year with this, you know, with this fascination that you've had with the locational direction based astrology. I'm like, wow. And I remember saying to myself, yeah, he got the transmission. See, and I'm not taking credit for your accomplishments in any way. What I'm saying is, when you get the transmission, it's not me. I'm transmitting something that I got along the way that goes back, that's truly ancient, that's truly transpersonal. And when that hits you, it activates something in you that's uniquely yours, man. And that's what I love to see people doing, is like, I always ask people, like, especially people who are in the second half of life, you know, the chore of the second half of life, as I see it, is like, what thing that if you don't do it, no, what is it that you need to do that only you can do? And if you don't do it, the world will be a poorer place. You know? And I see you doing that with the directional stuff and the incredible graphics that you're doing and everything. And it's like, it does my heart good to see that, because that's what our art needs to stay alive. It needs that transmission. And I know at some point you're going to be talking to somebody and they're going to get that seed and they're going to do some stuff that neither one of us would have imagined, you know?
Yeah, it's my intent in the way that I'm teaching. I mean, first of all, just in being eclectic, you know, like I'm a jazzer, I'm a saxophone player, and the way we really learn is learn how to play like cats that you like, and then you in that path find your own voice.
Right.
And you find a lot of people who just become a replica of their idol, and they're not bringing anything new to music. They're preserving something incredible, you know. Yep. But there should be as many astrologers as many astrologies as there are astrologers on one level. And the things that we are passionate about and come to and breathe through us, that is the gift we give back to this amazing goddess, astrology herself, right? And,
yeah, man. Yeah.
You know, so the thing that I've been into so much lately is just studying in the quadrivium, in the sacred geometry, which is number in space, and musical harmony, number in time, and astronomy, which is number in space and time, and number itself, number magic, and seeing how these are all like, they're kind of gateways into an intimate like relationship with astrology. That's not just learning the symbolic language and learning how to read and speak it, but rather understanding it is, I feel that astrology is the poetic breath of nature. And that when we connect in these mystery ways, we're finding the roots of the rules and the proofs of the equations we use. You know, these are phrases that I'm very fond of. And I see what we are doing as sky astrologers, if you don't mind me using that phrase, because that's what we are, is many things for you. One is it gives you time to integrate these many things that we learn, just to have time out under the sky. But more importantly, and I always stress this to people that I take outside and share this here, when I bring people outside, astrologers, they'll really guilt themselves. I don't know the constellations. I don't know this. You know, they're kind of parroting this thing that we learned in our weird academic system, which is to feel like you're not smart enough. It's like, no, stop all of that. Lay down, close your eyes, sink into the earth, become the mother, feel her grasses growing over you and her deers feeding from you and the flowers sprouting from you, and then open your eyes and just stare in awe and wonder at that infinite sky. Because the password to the gateway of the temple where you start receiving that direct transmission is wonder. It literally is, I will never know, and that's when the knowing starts showing. Right? So much of what I'm doing with my students, it's like, wow, actually I had experiences in drawing geometries where I set out to draw like the flower of life, for example, and I drew one circle, and then I woke up with this like drool in that circle out of some trance of like an hour of just staring at a circle like I saw it for the first time. And so all my students, it's like, hey, draw 108 circles and then let's wrap, you know, just because I'm trying to offer not what I learned in that process alone, but also offer them, you know, that initiation, because they're going to have an experience and learn something there that
it's a living, breathing thing, right? And it's always moving. And that's what I love about what you're doing is I see the movement, you know. There's so many times where people, like, they put one chart up and then they put another chart up, and it's these static snapshots. And people think that's what astrology is. It's like dissecting these static snapshots. And it's like, man, that's anything but what it is to me, because the thing is alive, you know. It's always flowing and moving, and you know, I know that you know exactly what I'm talking about, because I've seen you like display that and show that in some really beautiful ways, graphically, and, you know, with the videos that you make and everything. And that sense of aliveness, I think, is something that is going to make, is going to make a difference in keeping this thing alive,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, our charts are snapshots in time and
They
place,
are.
which we see in the houses, and yet the Earth does not stop spinning for you, bro.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, to see that motion, which I think we're honoring astrologically through techniques like secondary progressions or solar arc, even whatever, But yeah, to see that motion and to actually learn to see the chart in the sky, which isn't that hard, and to see that it doesn't stop. I mean, it's amazing how fast the sun sets when it gets down to it, right? So just those experiences, like I love bringing people out under the sky, especially people who don't have an idea of what Saturn means, and just playing my drum and pointing to a light in the sky, or maybe I'll point to Saturn, but won't say that's Saturn, and encourage people to have a journey and come back, because then I get to learn through their own wisdom what Saturn means in such a way that I maybe would never hear personally, because I'm trying to tell Saturn what he or she instead of hearing what he or she is when I'm doing astrology by the book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. I totally, I mean, I learned astrology that way. I used to just sit and like journal out all my transits, I had a day journal. And I would I would get the ephemeris and I'd be all like, okay, today I have this transit, that transit, and the other. And then I would be like, okay, let me live my life and see what happens and let them tell me what they're about,
Yeah.
And yeah, so I get exactly what you're saying. And it's definitely a beautiful thing. I love it.
Yeah. And a transit for you, I mean, you told me this early on when we started speaking of like, no transit or progression or whatever is not going to awaken something that's not in the natal chart, right? And that being said, because my nativity and yours are different, like I'll experience a transit differently than you do, right?
Absolutely.
And so that part of coming in directly, I was speaking about, well, this wasn't my experience last night per se at this Plants and Planet Talk. I do often find that these herbalists who are studying the old ways of, alchemical astrological herbalism, which is beautiful, they tend to have a really intimate relationship with the plants, and they do things like and I actually learn a lot from speaking with them of like the idea of a plant sit, right? Go in a field of St. John's wort, soften your gaze until you're seeing through that cloudy way, until you experience the spirit of that plant who will inform you what it does, right? And so I know so many incredible herbalists who have been through that path. And for me, it's like, okay, let's have a planet sit and soften my gaze and experience Saturn in some way. And it might be that Saturn for me isn't what it is for you. And so what I find in the planet people, for the most part, they have this really intimate and dynamic and rather fluid relationship with the plants. But the relationship with the planets is very rigid, and it's very rule-based. And that's the word you hear more than anything. Saturn rules. Jupiter rules.
Yeah, right. Rule.
Right. But there is that idea of plant metal correspondences with the planets. And it's really cool then to think about, oh, why would nettle be associated with Mars? And there's spikes, or, this plant grows here and it's kind of mucusy and it's a moon thing. And to see that correspondence or to see in these metals, because, on the magical side of the craft, and this is something I've really been thinking about recently. I heard this cool podcast with on Rune Soup, Gordon White's thing with Austin Coppock. And Gordon pitched this idea that the reason why you use gold in a talisman for the sun is because solar spirits like to live in gold. It feels like home for them, and the metaphor that he uses is like, hey, a hole in my backyard is a home for a snake. A snake would not feel at home in my house. I wouldn't feel at home in that hole. Sun spirits feel at home in a piece of gold. Moon spirits feel at home in a piece of silver, or with these, right, these different
it's crazy. If you study the physical properties of the metals, you can see how they literally, you can order them in a way where it's like, oh yeah, of course, the metals match the order of the planets, like, you know.
Right. Yeah, the conductivity, right, and the atomic weight, it moves through the Chaldean order.
It's like, oh my God, no one, like, these were not accidental. Yeah, and I think what Gordon's talking about there is like that, the idea that you know, as astrologers, everybody knows that we can tell them sort of like the celestial forecast, right? The celestial weather. Oh, it's going to be raining, so bring your umbrella. Or, oh, it's a really sunny day, like go out and have fun and whatever. But there's a whole nother side of it that's always been, you know, a major use, is that of bringing this spiritual energy of planetary spirits or star spirits or angelic spirits, and actually inviting it to dwell in your life through an object like a talisman or an amulet or something, and sort of permanentizing that relationship in some way.
Right.
You know, I think that aspect of what we do is being reawakened. There's a lot of people working with that now, whereas when I came in, you know, I don't think there were really that many people. And that's one offshoot of the traditional, you know, where, you know, it's not just about like, you know, translating these old texts. People are going, hey, these old texts are talking about like making talismans. Like, how do you do that? And people are doing it, you know, and I think it's awesome because, you know, as you well know, you know, astrology and alchemy, as you were talking about with the metals and magic, were always meant to be practiced together as one hermetic art. And
I mean, I feel like a naughty Scorpio because I have some fear, and it's really like, I guess, you know, even unknown superstition based about practicing on the magical side and creating talisman and that.
No, I think it's actually pretty pragmatic, bro, because you can, I mean, you know, if you're not careful and you just, you know, you think that, you know, in other words, the spirits are going to do what they want to do. You're not commanding them to do your will. You're inviting them to live in your life. And so, you know, it's two different things. Yeah. It's not like, you know, you're the master of the universe and you're going to say, hey, you do that. Not like that at all. You're inviting them to come live with you. And like, sometimes you get some naughty house guests, right?
Yeah. And then you have to learn how to purge them in that, right? So
you have to learn how to either live with them or purge them. Yeah. So, no, I think that's wholly respectable for you to have, you know, but at the same time, you can get some amazing house guests that you come in and like open up your eyes to new things and or just like, you know, connect you with something else that was missing that you would have never found on your own.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, it's worth it, I think, to begin to learn this stuff and to see our art as a whole, like becoming more whole, I guess. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. And I'm just really excited about this time. And, you know, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is that this time is a very special time in many ways, but in a couple ways that we've already talked about together. Back in Sedona, we did a dual presentation where you were talking about the alignment of the galactic equator, you know, with the Earth cross, with the winter solstice. And
folks can see that online if they want. It's called Sacred Journey of Souls, spelled SOLS, because I'm talking about this kind of solstice alignments to the galactic cross. And then Gary, you just put that talk from Sedona up on your own YouTube.
Yeah, I put my part of it up on my YouTube thing. So definitely go back and check those out.
Yeah, we'll say the name of it, which was
Elemental Ascent.
Right. Yeah. And speaking about the dance of Jupiter and Saturn through the elements, which is an amazing thing. And, Yeah, you know, what I've been tripping on so much lately is having been invited. You know, here I'm holding in my hand, for those who are listening on radio, the Mountain Astrologer is kind of year ahead, which says 2020. And if you look at the article of the Mountain Astrologer at this time of the year for the last few years, it's like 2015, 16, 17, 18, 2020. And it's like astrology, my great joke has been like, wow, you know, be here now, that great, you know, Ram Dass quote. If you put an astrologer hat on him, suddenly it says, be here next year. Because everybody's so excited about this Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto triple gathering.
The thing is, it's happening now, man. It really is. Right. And literally, because Jupiter and Saturn are making a very unique connection right now, that it will afford us the opportunity to dream into being that 2020 reality.
So beautifully said, man, because this is one of my hesitations with astrology in general, because astrology is not a way out, it is a way in when we're doing it right. Yeah. And it can be so easy, you know, to future trip with astrology. Like, how many times have I had a client come in and tell me about this thing that's happening in my chart in February 18th, 2023? It's, no. You know what I mean? Like, why are you trying to go there? What's happening in your life right now? And let's see how right now is in a pattern that's opening that, because this is in your awareness and that's important. So I don't want to in any way reject that, but I think it can be a danger in this study of time and cycle if we leave the moment to explore the future. Our explorations of the future or of the past should inform this moment when we're doing.
I love bookending the moment. I really, because that's the thing, that static snapshot of any given chart, all the stuff in there, it came from somewhere and it's going somewhere else. And when you get that, when you get the dynamic aspect of it and where it's coming from and where it's going, then you see that static snapshot in a whole different light.
Yeah.
You know? Like, just for instance, the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, it's coming from a conjunction in Taurus. Right. It's going to a conjunction in Aquarius. Yes. So those two, so right now what's happening is all of us are closing down a 20-year cycle of experience where the Taurus house in our chart was dramatically accentuated, and you know, for me that's the fourth house, right? Mm-hmm. So and what happened in 2000? I was newly married. I bought my first home, right? And for the last 20 years, I've been doing this thing where I like buy a little bit bigger one, fix it up, sell it. Oh, I got more money, buy a little bit bigger ones. And it's like, and now we're at the end of that where it's like, yeah, I'm 50 now. I don't quite have the energy I did back, 20 years ago. And maybe I just want to find, the right one and kind of stick with it, Mm-hmm. and that would be right in tune with the cycle, right? Because that thing that came into being 20 years ago is passing away, and to expect it to stay for another 20 years wouldn't exactly be realistic. So right. On the one hand, we're allowing something that has been a very big part of our life for 20 years to right. kind of close its, to close up, to get closure with that, to wrap it up, and to, and to begin to, and at the same time begin to dream forward and like, okay, where am I being invited to open up this 20-year process in the Aquarius?
So for me, so that was May 28th, 2000, Jupiter and Saturn met in the 23rd degree of Taurus. And that was, that's right at my south node in my 12th house, and I guess wow. On that trip. And this one in the first degree of Aquarius, like, better question is, where does that land for people listening? Where does that land in your chart? Yeah. And here's Jupiter now in Sagittarius with Saturn in Capricorn. And this is the balsamic phase, right? I mean, if this was the moon and the sun, this is that sliver crescent just before sunrise. That's often called Hecate's bow because it's heading into the darkness,
Right.
And here's the thing, you know, when we are looking ahead to this 2020 and Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all gathering in Capricorn, well, from a traditional point of view, you know, we're looking at Jupiter, Saturn, and actually they do not perfect in Capricorn, but the actual conjunction is in the first degree of Aquarius on December 21st, 2020. And,
Yeah.
you know, one thing I've been thinking about with that, I'm heading back to Mexico to do a retreat down there. And then
Nice.
Anna and I are going to go to Palenque. It'll be my
Awesome.
first time there. I was thinking of this earlier when you were speaking about these temples of Asclepius and how you would go and enter the dream,
Yeah.
you know, and these sacred sites. I was just speaking with this wonderful woman, Patricia Arion, who does a lot of tours, and she lives in Cairo and does a lot of tours in Egypt and around the world. And was speaking about her about collaborating and maybe bringing people out to Giza and look at some of the star alignments of the pyramids and stuff.
Wow.
Right? And we were just speaking about how important it is that when we go to these places and observe the impossible stonework and such, because I can get very intellectual about that and take 1,000 pictures. And even if I'm in that state, I'm still receiving the code of these sacred sites, which were very intentionally built in power places on earth. But if I'm wise enough to sit and dream into this, then I will receive so much more. And, you know, when that image of going into that temple of Asclepius and laying down, I was thinking about this recently, Gary, that like, you know, the horizon and then the meridian line of the chart, it kind of shows that we have two primary positions as beings. Like we lay down where we enter the dream realms. And I see that there's laying down planets like moon, you know, and then we stand up. And oftentimes, you know, when we're born, we're kind of laid down on the mother or like held up by the father.
Yes.
And
Yes.
those two, like the cross in that way.
Yeah.
But I really think that so much of Saturn and Jupiter and who they are and what they can do together, it demands on one level that we slow down Saturn, right? And a beautiful thing about Saturn and Capricorn, where the astronomy actually once again agrees with the astrological doctrine, is that Saturn is most slow in Capricorn. Saturn is furthest from the sun, coldest, darkest. These are all Saturn things. And we can look at that and say, oh, that's all bad. And no, like that is all grounding, you know? So if we want to speak with plants, we need to slow ourselves down to plant speed. And if we want to speak with the stones, like these sacred sites around the world, you need to become the stone. And Saturn is the teacher of that. So if we can go into that Saturn place, in that very grounded and slow place, we don't do that to escape the dream and that expanded Sagittarian vision quest. We do that to enter it. And this is the opportunity afforded, I think, by this balsamic phase of Jupiter, Saturn, and in their own domiciles, Jupiter and Sagittarius, Saturn and Capricorn, who say, don't jump ahead to 2020. Right now, you have the opportunity to take advantage of this groundedness of the Saturnian Capricorn realm. But don't forget that Jupiter is in Sagittarius, y'all. Like that place, that vision quest, that exploration, that is what is available to you. And in that place, we can dream forward how we will utilize this very significant power of the 2020 alignments, right?
Yeah, beautiful, man. Yeah, you're just reminding me, the very first article that I ever had published in TMA was back half a Saturn cycle ago, when Saturn was at its perihelion. You know,
Cancer.
peri meaning close to, and helios sun. That's when it's at its fastest, right? In Cancer, right? So now Saturn's literally like, you know, further away and slower, and you know, slowing down and really like actually understanding the structure of our lives, the fabric of our lives, you know, understanding the natural boundaries that are in place, and which ones we want to embrace and which ones we want to like maybe move beyond. But like consciously like embracing the old man, like not as like this like, you know, nasty, you know, transit that's like, oh, when it comes around, I kind of cringe and like, you know, pray that nothing bad happens to me or anything, but actually being like, hey, you know, grandfather, like, let me remember your medicine. Let me become like, let me become stable in my foundation, right? Let me be building from a place of strength and not the fool who builds on the shifting sands, right? Let me bring these things that I want to share with the beauty of my heart with all these other people. Let me bring it through a structure where they can really receive it in its true glory. And you know what I'm saying? And like, just really get that grandfather energy. And from there, when can you jump the highest? When you're like standing on one foot, you know, it's football season. So you know, you always hear people saying, oh, he threw the pass off his back foot, you know, that's why it got intercepted. It's like, yeah, right. Martial arts, man. True strength, true ability to expand comes from a solid base.
Yeah.
You know? And so,
you know, just because you said that, I'm going to Tai Chi tonight, and something that I've really been suggesting for folks, something we should always be doing, but with Uranus coming into Taurus, you know, we were talking about talismans before. I think as astrologers, and most people listening to this, you know, you are astrologers if you're following the planets as far as I'm concerned, whether that's your professional work or not. Like, we are conduits for the celestial symphony. We are the terrestrial translators of the heavenly happening, you know, and we are like, in ourselves, we are living talismans for these planetary energies. And that, for me, that's like the most important part of having a sky practice, because it's odd for me, but when I look up at the stars, somehow that's what's helped me understand that I'm an earthling, and to really feel my feet in the ground. And as we like tune into our own electrical system, our nervous system, you know, so like the qigong and the tai chi and the yoga or the dance work or whatever it is for us to really come into the body right now, so we can be earthly and grounded, because things are getting more electric, you know. And to say about that, we say things like this as astrologers, and there can be so much fear play with it. But you know, I remember that I went down to Peru for the 2012 thing, right? Yeah. And that's actually really where I received astrology on December 14th of that year. Jupiter was right at my ascendant. I had this strange conversation with Jupiter in the night sky. It's when I realized you could actually speak with planets. And sometimes they speak back. Usually they don't. Usually it's a dream thing, or they'll send a messenger like a Gary Caton into your life or whatever, you know. But shortly after that, I went to Machu Picchu for December 21st, 2012, and, you know, was preparing for the great shift or whatever it would be. And then the next day it was December 22nd. And it didn't really seem like anything had happened after all of this buildup, because I was really into it. And I wasn't.
What had happened is that there was a switch that got turned, and your capability to be a vessel for this transmission was
right. I mean, there was an absolute apocalypse, I'll even say, but definitely a revelation for me, because I brought myself to it. I devoted myself to it. We had a lot of global energy, right? I mean, even from the doom and gloom thing that was being promoted by the Hollywood billboards and whatever. I mean, it seemed from the conspiracy theory point of view that like that world was trying to get us to co-create destruction. But there's a chance that it was more like, hey, play that fantasy out on the silver screen so it doesn't happen in our reality. But regardless, like what did happen for me is my old life ended and my new life began. And I feel I feel very passionately for the astrology community, because, you know, unlike 2012 where there was this Maya calendar thing and other things, like nobody maybe we'll see, because astrology is becoming more mainstream and more popular, thankfully, right? We'll see if the newspapers are talking about 2020 a little bit, because the astrologers really do. But regardless, you know, here comes this thing, and if I tell you that it's the best movie ever that you're going to go see, you go to it and you're like, whatever. And if I tell you it's terrible, you go and you're like, oh, that was way better than that dude said it would be. It's really important for us not to go with this bias or this thinking of what it's going to be, but rather bringing our dream. Because yes, there's this gathering in Capricorn, and that's real, but still this node of this synod of Jupiter Sagittarius, it's the first degree of Aquarius. This is probably one of the criterion of the gateway of the new age, you know? And it is about the revolution, and no true revolution will go down without first revelation. And so this is this time for us to go into that temple, to slow down, be in the dream, and open our consciousness to receive the vision that will set us free, and decide how we want to use the energies of the years to come productively in our conscious co-creation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think you make two really good points there. Number one, like the world doesn't change like that very often, right? I mean, sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. Like, so that these alignments are seed points, right? Something is seeded in us, and it takes a while. When for instance, when an embryo is fertilized, it takes a while before you see the growth that says, oh, there's a baby going to be born in like 7 months, because it took 2 months for you to see that, right? And so just like with the moon, right? The new moon, you can't see that.
Yeah.
Right? It's not until the next day or the day after that first little crescent, you know? So it's important to remember that, like, you know, not only is, you know, things not going to change like instantly, that's going to change gradually, but also that, you know, no matter how much you may want it to be or think it's going to be X or Y or Z, it has its own thing it wants to be, right? And so there's no way you can predict with 100% accuracy. What I think the meeting ground there is that you can, and I encourage people, absolutely, I am not a fatalist, I'm not a stoic, and I don't believe astrology is really founded on stoicism, man. There's too much stuff going on where they kind of tweak the system, you know, bringing Saturn over to the diurnal sect, by the way. I mean, that's magic, yo, right? Yeah. I mean, let's heat this old cat up some where he's not so damn grumpy and, like, you know, cold and troublesome, right? That's magic.
Yeah.
But I think what you can do is you can absolutely focus like a laser on what you want, what your heart's desire is. But you can leave completely wide open how that's going to happen, right? You can release all expectations to how and where and when that's going to happen, right?
Expectation is the enemy of surprise. Surprise is the gateway to experience, and experience smells a little something like understanding. You know what I mean? So often you make the list of the perfect partnership that you're manifesting, and suddenly you eliminated you from the opportunity of seeing that it's right there in front of your eyes, right? Or that it's already happening. Or because as we are here to grow and evolve, it's not meant to go according to our plan. I mean, I heard this thing from you that I understand came through Kelly Lee Phipps, but that Saturn is plan the work and work the plan. It's a really beautiful statement you've shared with me many times, right? But sometimes if we plan the work so much, we lose the beauty of the play. Right. And, you know, the thing that I love to say is, like, when your work is your love, you know, true work gets done. And that's part of this year. It's like, yes, there are changes coming our way, and there are things to prepare for. But you don't necessarily prepare for that by, like, digging your underground lair to survive whatever. It's about preparing for that by being in a stillness where you can not force the dream, but receive the dream, to dance with that other side of yourself that lives in these other realms, you know, and is always that guide. And so often that guidance comes through the feeling of love.
Yeah, and it's that's the place. I mean, that's what Joseph Campbell said, you know, follow your bliss, man. Follow that which you love, and, you know, the rest will take care of itself, you know. And so, you know, so plan your work and work your plan, yes, but don't become In other words, don't become so rigid and so, you know, expectation that all my, and then when, you know, when December 21st, 2020 comes and that thing that you had rigidly planned doesn't happen, and you go, and you chuck it, right? Because like,
what does Jupiter say? You know, that would be a response to plan your work and work your plan.
yeah, right. I mean, that's a really good question, because you're trying to bring those two principles together. I think Jupiter says, you know, like, dream, and you know, Jupiter is like, dream big and embrace the possibilities, right? Embrace. Oh, that's another thing that Kelly used to say: if you argue for your limitations, you'll have to live with them. But if you explore your possibilities, then you get to, you know, dream into a new kind of life, you know? So I think that plan your work and work your plan, yes, but also embrace possibilities and keep an open mind, and, you know, and keep some passion in the thing, so that, you know, you're not just, because, you know, if you're just planning your work and working your plan like as a corporate zombie would, you know, like, you might get there, but you might get to the top and go, yeah, nothing happened. And here you are on the top of this magnificent mountain, exactly where you planned to be, but you get there and you can't enjoy it because you've just been robotically.
Yeah, or you don't even know you're there because you thought you were supposed to climb a different mountain, right?
What a travesty that would be, right?
Yeah, and it's a pretty common thing, right? So I mean the thing that, for me, I guess the number one thing I'm addressing in consultations, right, is just sitting with people who are trying to figure out who they are and what they're here to do, and how they're here to serve and give, you know? It's like, well, what do you love? And it's like, we don't even know anymore. And so much of that is because we've been disconnected from our passions, which demand us also to explore and authentically express our pains and fears and all that, right? Because our passions and joys live in that same realm. But
yeah, it's really interesting to me how, you know, when times get tough, right, it feels like possibilities are less, right? It feels like you have less ability to risk, less ability to, but really when times get tough, it's like that's when you need to be able to be open the most, because think about what happens when you're born, man. When you're born, you're floating around in the womb, you're just blissfully like, yeah, this is awesome, and then all of a sudden, right, the walls start closing in, and it's like, and then another one comes in, you're like, oh man, whoa, what's going on? What did I do to deserve this? You know, leave me alone, I was happy. And and then next thing you know, a little bit more, and pretty soon you're like compacted down to nothing, and it's like, oh my God, there's nowhere for me to go, except, you know, down the tunnel. And then the real journey starts, where, you know, you have to like navigate this tunnel before you can be, you know, born into this incredible wide world that you could never have even imagined from where you were. I mean,
but, you know, that floating in the womb space, it's so cool because you are in a very constricted space, and yet probably the most expansive. I mean, can we ever really go back there? I mean, that is that place of the dream. It's amazing that, you know, when I talk about that side of us that is the laying down side, it tends to be a physical paralysis or release to the surrender of sleep that opens that amazing opportunity to travel unlimited through time and space.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of the Jupiter and Saturn thing. You know,
yeah, I think Stan Groff relates that to Neptune, the floating in the womb.
But when Neptune wasn't around, that was Jupiter and Moon, right?
Yes, yeah, it would be very much Moon in a classical sense. Yeah, but you know what I think is really cool, what he says, and I mean, besides the planetary associations, I mean, he says Neptune, and then Saturn's the restriction, and then Pluto's going through the canal, and then Jupiter and Uranus is being born, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we could argue those associations and rearrange them.
Let me share this other model.
But what I think is the most fundamental thing that he says is that every time you go through change in your life, you go through that process again, because that's how you got here. You don't get anywhere else without going through that again, right?
Yeah, and so maybe this 2020 is one of those gateways for the collective. And so we want to make sure that we enjoy our time this year and do the play and the love and the work that's available in the womb space, where we're like drinking through like the stomach snorkel and we're held in like a floaty, awesome, weird light because it's dark space or whatever. You know, the motto that I use is the hot air balloon. It's like, if we say that Neptune is this heavenly unity and a symbol of that, Uranus is like this incredible genius that's like, hey, you could build a balloon, build a hot air balloon and, you know, accelerate that ascension, bro. You know, and then Jupiter is the hot air that lifts you. Mm-hmm. You know, Jupiter is like, don't you remember you're an angel being?
Right.
You know, and Saturn's like, part of my language, but fuck that. Finish the gig. Like, you came to be an earthling, right? And is the skin of our solar system in that regard. And in the hot air balloon, the hot air that lifts you will take you nowhere without the fabric that constricts
that
you.
Container,
That's that Saturn realm, right? And so here we have where expansion meets constriction. And it feels like some war until we get the galactic giggle of the thing, that they are in it together to lift you up. Yeah, and we can think, and we teach so often that Saturn and Jupiter are like opposites. But when you play with the traditions, you see that actually Jupiter and that far-reaching philosopher is the opposite of Mercury, who is this great magician, but also looking at the things here that we can touch and see and speak of. And then Saturn, you know, that distant cold one, is the opposite to the lights, where the relationship of Jupiter and Saturn, especially if we're considering them as either Sagittarius, Capricorn, Jupiter and Saturn, or on the other side of this gateway, Jupiter and Pisces and Saturn and Aquarius, which will also happen. These are not opposite sides. These are inconjunct signs.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing, is that, you know, from a traditional point of view, most people would say, oh, Saturn and Capricorn, Jupiter and Sagittarius, oh, they can't see each other. They can't cast rays. There's no conversation going on. You know, there's nothing to be done yet.
Right.
Thing. You've got this wonderful.
Right. So Gary's laughing if you're listening on the audio, because I just held up a keyboard, and a thing that I'm really interested in is mapping the 12 signs of the zodiac to the 12 half steps of a musical octave. I'm not the first to do this. I do it a little differently because I put A with Aries and then B flats, Taurus, etc. There's a whole movie you can see of mine I put up recently called The Harmony of the Heavenly Spheres, Hearing the Aspects. Nice. But just to play a few for you, here's like, this would be a square, and here's a trine. And you can really feel that. Let me play the T square.
Whoa.
Here's the Grand Cross. You know, and it sounds like what it is, right? Here's an opposition. But here is the neighboring signs. And they're just in different dimensions.
Yeah.
So I love this in the doctrine. It almost kind of confirms that doctrine when I hear this and bring in more sentient ways to experience this quest of astrology, which can get too intellectual, and experience it in my body. When I hear that, it brings me into experiences I've had in like some dream spaces and journey spaces where I feel like I'm in a different dimension, and it has this like buzzing to it, you know? And Sagittarius and Capricorn in so many ways are different dimensions. Totally. And neighboring signs, it's fascinating in astrology where we so often speak about, well, Gemini becomes Cancer, becomes Leo, whatever. Like, it's not so much of a smooth dial in our doctrine, but more of a 12-notch switch in these gateways. And it's more like, you know, Gemini is connected to Leo by that sextile, but not connected to Cancer. There's that flipping of polarity, right? And so these ideas,
it's like day night, you know. It's it's the difference between night and day. Really, is you know, Sagittarius is the diurnal domicile of Jupiter, and Capricorn is the nocturnal domicile of Saturn. So it's very much like trying to, talk to somebody who is in a nocturnal environment and say, you're in a diurnal, and you say, well, can't you see that right over there? And they're like, nah, man, I pretty much can't see anything. It's dark.
Mm. Yeah, and these inconjuncts, which it's a term that modern astrologers usually reserve for the quincunx, the 150-degree aspect. But it's also something that describes neighboring signs. Neighboring signs are like the most unalike when you look at all of them around the chart. And, the way I hear it usually taught these days is like, okay, well, Sagittarius, masculine, mutable, fire, Capricorn, feminine, cardinal, earth, they have nothing in common. But back in the day, they said, yeah, inconjunct, or they're blind to one another. There's no aspect. Aspect means to see. And just like the example I love to say, like if you and I were sitting side by side and you held up some numbers, some fingers, and said, how many fingers am I holding up? Like, I have to guess. It's not like I can look at you across the way. But what if I do guess that it's right? What if I guess that it's right 5 times in a row? Like, I'm actually tapping into something super, some extra sensory. And some of the signs neighboring to one another have a portal of that psychic opportunity that's more widely open than it is the case for others. And so we speak about, traditionally, there are conditions that can alleviate this inconjunct or blindness that was known as an aversion, right? Yeah. And so some of them are like when planets or signs share the same ruler traditionally. So like Aries and Scorpio, which are inconjunct in aversion traditionally because they're quincunx, but they're both ruled by Mars traditionally. So they're called like girding, or signs that agree on the path is a term that I've heard Robert Hand use for that. Yeah. But that really interests me because it's this other condition that actually Sagittarius and Capricorn share, that is antiscia, that better describes from the sky astrologer point of view signs that agree on the path.
Yeah, because they literally rise and culminate and set in the same places vis-a-vis the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, right? So their azimuth and everything is the same. They literally agree on their path through the sky, right? I love that thing that you did where you had like the totem pole example.
Well, let me show that thing, and we'll just cruise through it really super quick. So here's a New Year's chart I cast for San Francisco because I just gave a talk there for 2019. I mean, New Year's is a weird trip in itself because it's not an astronomical moment, right? New Year's in a lot of the world had Mars and Pisces, and San Francisco Mars and Aries, and that's another conversation. But to just show that Saturn and Jupiter at home in their domiciles. Right here is the traditional domiciles mapped out to the Chaldean order. And looking at the semi-sextiles of this year between Jupiter and Saturn, there are 3 of them. And these signs, Sagittarius, Capricorn, known as inconjuncts. For those who are watching the video, you'll see these traditional aspects between the signs and see that these conditions that are known as antiscia, or the L's in this image, are like girding, signs that share the same ruler, or C for contra antiscia. These are said to alleviate the aversion. So there are only 12 pairings that are, in a way, true inconjuncts or truly averse between the signs themselves. And I don't want to get too tech, but to honor, this is the way that we usually speak antiscia. If you take a chart and you put Aries on the first, like the natural chart wheel, and you fold the chart vertically around the solstice axis, then you will find these pairs, Aries and Virgo, Taurus and Leo, Gemini and Cancer, that are antiscia. Or if you fold the chart horizontally about the equinox axis, you find the contra antiscia pairs. But from a sky experience and the astronomy of the tropical zodiac, which is so important, because I think a lot of tropical astrologers, because our signs don't align with the constellations, feel that astrology, tropical astrology, is not astronomical. It's entirely astronomical.
Oh man, come on. Yeah.
And so it's so much of it is based on our experience of the heavenly happenings. And so one that we all know is that the sun is highest in summer and lowest in winter. And so a thing that I saw is that perhaps like the native totem pole could be used for this, that if and for the northern hemisphere, the sun culminates in the middle of the day, halfway between sunrise and sunset, every day due south. So if you were standing in the same place every day, due north of a totem pole, it's between you and the midday sun, you could see the sun climbing and sinking on that totem pole and moving in the lowest sign of winter, which are the northern hemisphere, 0 Capricorn, right? And Capricorn, the goat that climbs, right? Maybe it moves from the whale to the otter to the human up to the thunderbird at the top.
Right.
Astrological correspondent for the northern hemisphere, we would put, Cancer at the very top, and then come down from there, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius brings us all the way down. Or for the southern hemisphere, obviously all the way up, right? Capricorn climbs the goat climbs, and then we come back up for the northern hemisphere, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini. And you end up seeing these pairs of signs that are called antiscia. So the sun,
signs of like power, same amount of solar power in each one of them.
Yeah, so that's a perfect expression, and that is an ancient expression, right, of like power. Because say the sun 20 days before summer solstice, it's on its way to its highest height, and it's at the same exact height as the sun 20 days after the summer solstice, that's now leaving that highest height on its way down. And those for the northern hemisphere, those would be about 10 degrees tropical Gemini and 20 degrees tropical Cancer. And these are degrees that are known as antiscia. And they literally take the same path through the heavens. They are at the same height. And Sha is shadow, Greek for shadow. So the really cool thing about this is that we can work with this. Like if you make sundials, it's something that you notice over time, or just look at your own shadow day by day. You'll see that your shadow.
Look at the shadow on those 2 days. The shadow would be the same length, right?
Right, and so that's the antiscia, right? The summer solstice sun casts the shortest shadow at midday, and the winter solstice sun casts the longest shadow at midday. And the old tradition of meridian lines is actually, it's pretty cool, because after the church had in so many ways purged astronomy because some of the new revelations seemed to be contrary to the creation rap that was being told, well, in the Julian calendar, which didn't honor the true length of the year, in the Gregorian reform that came around, so much of that came in because Easter had slipped from the equinox. And they had to add 10 days and all that, but so many of these churches around the world have these meridian lines where they're tracking the length of shadow by the day. My favorite example is literally, there is a obelisk that came from Heliopolis, right? The Greek name for this city in Egypt. It is the city of the sun, right? And this obelisk was moved from there to Alexandria by Caesar in the time when our craft was really being formulated in Alexandria in the Hellenistic tradition. It was moved later from Alexandria by Caligula to Rome. And then finally, just after the Gregorian reform in the 16th century, moved from where it had been in Rome to the middle of St. Peter's Square at the Vatican. And they are using this Egyptian obelisk, which works on one level like a sundial, because you can see the shadow moving from the west when the sun rises in the east, through the north when the sun culminates in the south, to the east when the sun sets in the west daily. But they're also using it as a device to track where we are in the year just by the length of the shadow of this obelisk. And you do that by drawing a line on the ground from a stick, or in this case from this gigantic obelisk, due north for the northern hemisphere. And because
the Taoists did it with a stick. They did, right?
Right, or you can do this with your own body, right?
Yeah.
But so at the Vatican, they are literally tracking the sun's movement through the signs of the tropical zodiac using the shadow of an Egyptian obelisk. And there's this ground where they have plaques that say Scorpio and Pisces and Libra and whatever. And I just love that. But I think it's a really cool thing when we go out into the sky experience of how the signs there's high signs and there's low signs. There's also signs that rise north, which are Aries, Taurus, Gemini, going north of due east. The sun rises due east at equinox and then heads north. And then Cancer brings us back. Cancer, Leo, Virgo bring us back to equinox and due east, right? And so we can look at this at the altitude of the midday sun and the length of the shadow to explore these antiscia pairs, or we can look at where they rise on the eastern horizon or where they set on the western horizon. The signs themselves have homes on the horizon this way, and this is the ancient practice of tracking where we are in the seasonal year by seeing, which mountain peak the sun is rising against. And say we're looking at a peak like right now, as we're recording in January, the sun is rising everywhere in the world south of east. And it's rising in the same place here. What are we, some 20 days after December solstice? It's rising in the same place as it would have 20 days before December solstice, right? These are signs of antiscia. And so Sagittarius and Capricorn work like this. And specifically, when we look at Jupiter and Saturn in antiscia this year, what brought me to it was looking at the Venus-Jupiter conjunction that's coming really soon, January 22nd, 2019. Mm-hmm. And it's 16 degrees and 3 minutes Sagittarius, right? So this is a degree of the zodiac that happens, 14 degrees before the Capricorn solstice point. And it's therefore antiscia to 14 degrees after the Capricorn solstice point, which is 14 Capricorn, right? You will find that antiscia pairs, they always add to 30. So the antiscia of 1603 Sagittarius is 1357 Capricorn. And on the day of this Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Sagittarius, they're almost perfectly antiscia Saturn at 1353 Capricorn.
Wow.
And so we expect when we look at a chart like this, I think just naturally that Venus and Jupiter are exactly on top of one another, right? But
now, what do you think about experientially? You have these two planets that are like seemingly opposite principles, expansion and contraction, like foundations and faraway horizons, but they're in these signs of equal power.
Yeah.
So like, oh, maybe I should give those principles equal power in my life. Maybe whoa, check that out. Like, you mean I shouldn't be like, oh, woohoo, Jupiter, and like, go away, Saturn? You know what I'm saying?
It's an opportunity for Jupiter and Saturn to not, like, they're going to have a meeting in Aquarius, which is traditionally speaking like Saturn's realm, right? Yeah. But here they're having this opportunity to communicate, I would say, more on like in our psychic way. And it's like Jupiter can teach Saturn about Sagittarius, where he's right there with his own library. And Saturn can teach Jupiter about Capricorn, where he's right there with her own library, you know? And so they have this opportunity to communicate in this way. And we'll look at...
usually I don't like to get into politics, but I mean, I think a really great example is like, for instance, if you think about like, the business world versus like political stuff, like, you think about economics, right? For instance, and like, sometimes politicians have some kind of weird ideas about economics and stuff. But sometimes they can actually learn from each other, right? So like, for instance, the reason why building a border wall is stupid is not just because it's like racist and like xenophobic and whatever, but because economically, guess what? If your population is aging, then you know what? You don't have enough. It's a pyramid scheme, yo. Like, if you don't have enough people filling in the bottom of the pyramid, the thing's going to fall apart. And the population in this country is aging, like, and the thing is, we need the immigrants to fill in that gap. Immigrants tend to have more babies also. So it's like maybe if instead of like, maybe we could just speak each other's language, right? Like Jupiter could explain, hey, instead of saying, hey, stop being a xenophobic racist, say, hey, actually, dude, what you're saying doesn't make economic sense. Like maybe they would get it better if you spoke to them in that language than if you tried to call them.
They you're speaking about as Trump, right? So you're like, hey man, you're cutting yourself and us off from making money. And suddenly
now you guys attentive the money. Oh yeah, we got to make that money, baby.
So two really cool things came in as you're sharing that. Like one is, it is part of the Sagittarian quest is other culture and other language. I had this really cool breakthrough not long ago where I was having a haircut by a woman who's Japanese American, and we were talking and she was speaking about this really cool stuff. And suddenly in the midst of this stream in English, she said a sentence in Japanese and she just continued speaking in English. And I let her finish and I was like, hey, do you know that you actually spoke in Japanese during that? And she's like, oh my gosh, I did. And she's like, wow, it's because you can't say that in English. And it really opened this thing for me. I'm not bilingual. I'm like a hack with Spanish, but it was like, wow, if you expand your own consciousness through learning multiple languages, actually you're able to open into realms of consciousness that you can't do in one language.
Well, actually you are bilingual, bro. You speak astrology.
Right, cool. But Trump doesn't, right? Because the whole idea of talking and pitching a border wall during Jupiter and Sagittarius, like this is about expansion into other cultures, among other things, not the restriction of that knowledge. And so that's really where you're like fighting this idea of expansion versus restriction and not letting them work together and fighting the dream that could inform the time to come. And so this, and I love that example you bring of like politics and economics, because I look often when I'm speaking about these aversions of like, okay, how can I speak about ways to bring these two things that are not necessarily opposite, but are different, they exist in different realms, and find ways to communicate between those two worlds. And it's a really cool example. I struggle for examples when I'm on that quest of looking for things.
People say there's a common thing, like if you can explain it to your grandmother, then you really know, that's when you really know it, right? And it's like, and I worked with kids for a long time, and you have to communicate with children at their level, because otherwise it's just, remember the Peanuts? It's wah, 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 wah. And it's like, and so, I used to just say to them, hey, listen, y'all, like, remember all that stuff we did that was fun and you guys had a great time. And guess what? We don't get to do that. I was like one of them. I was telling them, like, man, this sucks because we don't get to do that today because, these XYZ rules. So instead of being the keeper of the rules, I was like the interpreter of, I was interpreting, like, hey, there's these rules and they're not my rules. They're not your rules. They're just there. And the thing is, if we don't work with them, we don't get to do the stuff that we like, that we enjoy together. Because, I enjoyed hanging out with them and taking them fishing or hiking or whatever. And that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to sit there and quote rules and stuff.
Right.
And so I've just found that, like, and as a counselor, if you can just figure out how to put yourself in the position of the other person, right? Walk that proverbial mile in their shoes, and then come back to where you have some distance and say, okay, how do I tell them what I see over here from where they're at? You see what I'm saying?
Totally.
And it's once you begin to be able to speak their language and go, hey, there's this thing, see that thing over there? Like, from here it looks like X, but I've been over there, and that this is what actually going on. They go, oh, okay. And next thing you know, you've actually got some commonality that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're just, these two things and they're very different and you're just talking at each other and rooted totally in that thing and not able to, like, do any of that exchange, it goes nowhere, you know.
Absolutely. You know, and a couple of things come in. One is that hold on a second, I pushed a weird button. One is that we can't deny rules altogether, and it's a really good example of bringing kids out fishing, right? Because there is the whole thing of you can fall off the boat, right? But more importantly, what came in for me there is that this idea of expansion and being true to the journey, again, it requires this like grounding so that we're not just running away from a thing, but running into something with a firm footing going down. And there's actually what really came in, totally just ran away from me, and that's okay. It's living in the dream world.
But it's like, you know, what basically my message was to them was, hey, look, there's these things that you got to take care of as long as you're living here. You know, I was like basically what's called a house parent, or, you know, residential counselor. It is a group home, right? As long as you're living here, there's these things that you're going to have to do, right? And like, there's no way around that, right? So like, check it out. What if we just bust them out real quick and then go have fun?
Yes. Yeah, see, plan the work and work the play.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, this is the other thing that came in, is just the, you know, I have people come to my talk sometimes, you know, and especially in Seattle, I was speaking a lot at like a yoga community, and not necessarily to astrologers or astrology students, you know. And I heard this so often, and people were like, you know, I had no idea what you were talking about it, but I couldn't not pay attention because you were so passionate about it. And I think that's something that it feels in antiscia as well.
You know, I don't know what you were saying, but you look damn good saying it, brother.
But it felt good. You know, it was doing something. And, you know, even that, like, you know, like if I'm listening to you, sometimes you'll be speaking about something that I haven't studied and I don't understand yet. And there's a frustration of like, oh, I should just turn this off because I don't get it. It's like, no, you are planting that seed that will sprout when it's ready for me. And we know that, like in the alchemical, or, you know, in the symbolism, the symbol will speak at least in 7 ways. And so we should always have our teachings like apply to the seasoned sage as much as it does to the initiate, you know, and really awaken that. So, and we're kind of going marathon here, Gary, but I would love to show a couple more pictures to bring us to this other side of the astronomical happening, you know. And I'll start with this picture right here that I have on my desktop, which is a picture that I took of a Moon Venus conjunction not long ago.
Wait, that's a conjunction? But they're so far apart.
But they are so far apart. And we don't see this in a chart. And, you know, our friend Adam Gainsberg has this wonderful thing that he says that not all conjunctions are created equally. There's so many different considerations. And this is one of the great, you know, practical necessities, I will say, of the astrologer having a sky practice, is the sky herself will teach you things you will never see in a chart, or just learning it through the doctrine and the written word will feel like a work where the sky itself shows you this organically like a play. I mean, you and I, Venus, I say you and I, Venus, you and I, Gary, in so many ways have both been welcomed to the sky study by Venus.
Oh, man.
When you explore Venus as morning star or evening star, every now and then this trickster pops into the scene, Mercury. And then Mercury teaches it's a much harder smoke to grasp because he doesn't make himself available for that long. And even by some of the rules that I was taught of when you can expect to see Mercury as a morning star or an evening star because he's so far from the sun, I learned from my experience, and therefore from Mercury, that that's not always true. It depends what sign he's in and all that, and we're not going to go there so much right now. Yeah. But one thing you definitely learn when you bring your experience to the witness of the sky is that a conjunction in the heavens does not look like it does on a chart, where these two symbols are right on top of one another.
Very rarely does, anyway, yeah.
Right. And so what we're looking at here in this Moon-Venus conjunction, the image, and for people listening on the audio, I'm just showing an image, as you can probably tell, of Venus and Moon near each other, but in no way on top of one another, which is called an occultation. And here they're pretty far apart. And the reason is they differ in latitude is one of the ways this would show up, right? So let me...
Yeah, on this dimension, they're conjunct. They're in the same degree, but on this dimension, they're actually pretty far apart, right?
Yeah, and so this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, and for anyone who's listening might want to cast a chart, it's January 22nd, 2019, 4:25 a.m. Pacific time, all right? And so Venus and Jupiter conjoined in Sagittarius, and they're antiscia Saturn, okay? But when I look, and this is one way to see this in the tables, I can see that the declination of Jupiter and Saturn are very similar at that time, but Venus is not close. And I can also see this reflected like on the tables in their latitude. But if I saw this in the sky, and frankly, we wouldn't at this time anyway, because the sun is up. But, you know, I'm looking right now showing Stellarium software, which is an open source astronomy software. I really encourage all astrologers to play with. Stellarium, STELLARIUM.org. We'll find you to a place where you can download it for free for Mac or PC. And here I'm showing the same moment in time. And Venus, from the Northern Hemisphere's point of view, this is cast for San Francisco, Venus is way above Jupiter, like more heavenly in the northern latitudes, which for the Northern Hemisphere are further from the ecliptic, the path of the sun, and up towards the heavens. So I think of, for the Northern Hemisphere at least, northern latitude as reaching higher than that degree of the zodiac, which is always on the ecliptic, reaching it up into the heavens. Whereas the southern latitudes, like you can see Mercury in the same image, is more grounded down to the earth. And that can be a challenging thing.
Those two planets are literally going to be visible. The northern one's going to be visible way longer. It's going to be above the horizon way longer than the southern one, right?
Yes.
So it's literally like Mercury would literally spend more time under the ground, like under the horizon, and the northern one would literally spend more in the above. It's, you know.
And in the doctrine, there seems to be some favoring of northern latitude planets. And I've heard you say this, Gary, that, well, perhaps that's because they spend more time visible.
Yeah, and being seen is kind of nice.
So it's important to say that that's then a northern hemisphere trip. I mean, this is a very challenging thing about being an astronomical astrologer, is the tale of two hemispheres that exist in our world. So we'll just kind of continue to speak northern hemisphere. But very importantly, that is latitude. It is a planet's separation, we could say vertically, from the ecliptic plane, right? The plane of the Earth-Sun experience shown in the screen here by the golden curve. You'll see the sun is right on it, and it always is, because that's the definition of the ecliptic. And the planets are generally close, but they all have their own trip. So Gary's work, I mean, you're familiar with Gary's work, who's really informing us, for example, that Mercury's retrogrades are not back and forth on a line as we show them in a chart too often, or a lot of people's illustrations show that, but that Mercury or Venus or whoever, they do these amazing loops and these amazing dances, these amazing patterns. And so we open up through the sky study to another dimension of our craft that takes us off of a line and brings us more into space, right? Mm-hmm. So if I bring in another plane here, which is the celestial equator, and that's just Earth's equator projected out into space. It is that plane from which we measure declination, right? So we can see that a conjunction, like in a chart when planets are in the same degree, they're not necessarily going to be on top of each other. And you can tell when planets are of different declination or in the same degree of different latitude. But you look here at this same time and look at the declination of Venus on that date, about 20 degrees, and Jupiter's about 22. So that conjunction is certainly not an occultation where Jupiter would actually block, or Venus would block Jupiter from our view. But there's Jupiter at 22 and Saturn at 22. And even though they're in different signs, they have the same declination. This is a parallel. So really importantly, degrees of the zodiac that are antiscia, where we were just talking about, degrees of the same power, or that take the same course through the heavens, and we're going to look at an animation of this, they are parallel, But because planets do not live on the ecliptic plane, antiscia does not necessitate parallel. Parallel does not necessitate antiscia. They're similar but different things, yeah? So just show a couple images here of latitude, longitude, which we track as zodiacal degree, and celestial latitude are measured from the ecliptic plane, whereas declination and its partners, right, ascension, are measured from the celestial equator. I call them respectively the circle of spirit, the ecliptic, because that's where the sun lives, and the circle of matter, the celestial equator, because it's the plane of Earth's spin, or our primary motion. It's all about Earth. All right, so Saturn will experience these parallel relationships with Jupiter thrice this year. Jupiter and Saturn are parallel on January 27th, 2019. And just notice when you look here, Jupiter's at 17 degrees Sagittarius and Saturn's at 14.5 degrees Capricorn. Now, those are not degrees that are antiscia. 17 Sag, it'll always add to 30, is antiscia 13 Capricorn. And here's Saturn at 14.5 Capricorn. So this is a tricky thing to see in the chart. We have to go to the tables, or we could see this in the sky. But in the tables, we would see that when planets have the same declination, they are parallel. And so here's the declination table showing that on this date, January 27th, 2019, the time is 7:06 p.m. Pacific, that both Saturn and Jupiter are 22 degrees and 11 minutes south declination. Here's their second parallel, which is July 21st this year. And
cool. I was going to look those up. You got it. Awesome.
Their third parallel. Yeah, and check out the video version of this if you're listening, because we're showing a bunch of charts and things. That second parallel, by the way, also is basically parallel almost exactly Pluto on that July 21st, 2019 date. Their third parallel is September 21st, basically the equinox, just before, at 22.5 degrees south.
It looks like they're a little closer to antiscia that time.
Yeah, so on that date, which is the September 21st, Jupiter 1653 and Saturn 1355. So the antiscia would be Saturn at 1303, right? So it's a really cool thing, because if you're studying declination, it's interesting. Astrologers often pair longitude, which is zodiacal degree, with declination, but they're actually measured from different planes, right? And I found a lot of astrologers actually don't understand this, right? So it's going to the sky. Declination is such an important thing because it actually tell you how high or low a planet will be in your sky. It's something that we very much experience. And in this time when planets are of the same exact declination, though they will rise at different times, Sagittarius rises before Capricorn, right? Jupiter and Sagittarius will rise before Saturn and Capricorn, but they will take the exact same path through the heavens. So I'm going to skip that animation and show another one. I'll just say this, because these parallels are at 22 degrees south, and I'm looking right now at the one July 21st, 2019, where Jupiter and Sagittarius, Saturn and Capricorn, and also Pluto and Capricorn, they're all at 22 south in about 7 minutes. And that means that on Earth at the 22nd south parallel, right? And this runs through Australia and through, I think, Bolivia and some like near Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, Brazil, and through southern Africa and some of Madagascar. That in those places, and I'll show for near, this is Sao Paulo, Brazil, in this date, Jupiter and Saturn will both culminate, which means halfway between Jupiter rise and Jupiter set, or Saturn rise and Saturn set. They'll both culminate directly overhead. So there are places on Earth, and this really interests me as an eternal student of astrology, if we will see that this parallel is more expressed on this parallel of Earth, where these planets will both culminate directly overhead. Because they are parallel, which means they will travel on the same course through the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
And I swore I had an image to show that, or an animation to show that. I might dig it up while you reflect. There's one other thing that to inspire some reflection from you, Gary, and maybe we can end with that animation, is this, that, and our friend Lene Van Horn first brought this to my attention this year, that there are all of these occultations in the year of 2019. So this is a picture that I literally took of a sheet that she handed out in a presentation that we were honored to give together to the San Francisco Astrological Society for the 2019 year ahead recently. And she's showing all of these occultations by the moon, right? So
which means that the moon will literally blot out the moon, just like my hand is blotting out my face, right? The moon will literally blot out Saturn and Pluto like multiple times. She does to Jupiter once too, it looks like.
Yeah, but not until Jupiter moves into Capricorn.
Interesting.
Right. So, and this is because of where the planets nodes are. And I don't know that we need to go there right now, but just think the image that I showed before of a Moon-Venus conjunction, where Moon was way in that image to the left or to the north of Venus.
Literally same X, same Y, same Z.
Right. So when planets have the same declination, in this case, Moon and Venus on January 31st, or Moon and Saturn on February 1st, March 1st, March 29th, April 25th, May 25th, June 18th, and we could go on and on, because every month this year, Moon will occult both Saturn and Pluto. Every month of 2019, as Moon is moving through Capricorn, she will literally hide Saturn and Pluto from Earth's view. Now,
you know what that reminds me? It reminds me the thing you just said before, which is that Saturn is following Jupiter across the heavens in diurnal motion. Jupiter's leading the way, right? Which is always the case in any cycle, by the way, right? So if you look at the Venus-Mars cycle, in the second half of the cycle, Venus leads the way. The slower planet leads the way. In the first half of the cycle, the faster planet leads in the second half. And so Jupiter, think about it. Two things. You're at the end of a cycle, so you need to let go of the previous cycle, and you need to dream the future cycle into being, right? Well, you need Jupiter for both of those things, because if you're holding on too tight to this 20-year run that you've had, and you're like, no, I don't want to let that go, then you can't get the new one to come in, right? So Jupiter's like, let go of the old and dream into the new, you know? So I think that Saturn being, you know, occulted like that is just reminding us that, like, Jupiter's taking the lead here. And like being generous sometimes means like not holding on too tight. Like, you know, like being, you know, somebody says, well, you know, I'm not really on this trip anymore. I'm kind of over here, and being like, hey, I wish you well. You know, and just like, you know what I'm saying? And just generously saying, no, you have to be over here, because I'm, you know, hey, you know, okay, you know, you're over there. I'll see you around the bend or whatever. And just, you know, just being generous with the past and the future.
Oh, man, and that's so important, because as we're all going through these weirding experiences, as I like to call them, you know, I fell prey to this idea that everybody was going to have to open their eyes in the same way that I did. And, you know, now, gosh, may that not be so, because for me, it was in some kind of scorpionic conspiracy, shaking awake and painful. But we run around often, you know, coming out of this fog and feeling like we need to shake the world awake before the ship sinks, and that. Yeah. And nobody likes to be shaken awake. And when you shake the dreamer, they lose the vision, right? So I think a really important thing about the spiritual warrior is to understand that you're not this like agent of awakening, that you are here to keep the fire warm and lit so the sleeper can dream through the night. And when at their own pace they awaken, they will hold that vision that will set us free. And to remember that we are not only the awakening ones, and yes, the world needs us to open our eyes in this way, but we are the dreamers. And if we force ourselves into some future trip, we will lose that moment now. So I love this idea of the occultation, because it feels like it confirms so much of what we've been saying. Jupiter rises first. You see Jupiter first. And so for me, you know, Saturn, who's on the exact same path through the heavens on these 3 parallel days, he's literally traveling in Jupiter's wake. Like
right.
Saturn's entire path, it smells like Jupiter. It's, you know, it smells like Sagittarius spirit. And so Saturn gets to be informed in that, and we don't have to rush. And I think that idea of moon occulting Saturn, but not occulting Jupiter, is really reminding astrologers who are hip to this stuff, and this is why we're speaking about it, to remember the importance of Jupiter and Sagittarius this year, to not fast forward to all that Capricorn happening. And even if you do, understand that the Jupiter-Saturn meeting is in Aquarius, and that is such an important thing. Because, you know, I delivered this talk about the 2019 in the women's building in the Mission in San Francisco, and it was like, I ended with this image of flower power in the age of Aquarius. Like, it's part of actually my devotion this year, if I can get there, because I've become very cynical, and I think that's okay, and hesitant even in my own studies, as I expressed before. But I feel like my own restrictions that have been born through the truth ideas of like, don't spiritually bypass, be rigid in your practice. Like, that's all real, but it can also keep us from the amazement of like playing with a crystal, you know. And there is some woo stuff. It's kind of a year for me where I want to allow Jupiter and Sagittarius not only to bring me around the world, unfortunately that's happening to a lot of sites I want to see, but also allow me to expand my consciousness without all of those rules and restrictions, you know, at least for a year. Just be a kid again and just play again, as you were saying.
Yeah, get your work done. Right? Get your work done, kid, and do it quick so you can go play.
Yeah, so here I found this animation. Let me show this, and you know, kind of a fun way to play moving from there, because I'm speaking in all these rainbow ways. I did a rap in Hawaii recently and wanted to lead some sky stuff, really dark sky space, but this storm came in, as it will in Hawaii, especially in Kipahulu where I was. But then I'm talking and I could see Sirius, you know. I was like, wow, the sky cleared up, and we all went outside and there was this amazing moonbow. Which, you know, you think if you've only seen this is that ring of the rainbow around the moon. That's not the moonbow. That's a moon halo. A moonbow is actually a rainbow that is cast not by the sun, but by the moon. Yeah. And what I saw in that time is like, this is a cool way to envision the paths of the signs through the sky. And it doesn't necessarily work. It's like what I'm showing here is on the screen is like, you know, a rainbow of 7 colors. There would actually be 6 colors, 12 signs, but they are paired by antiscia, right? So that Gemini and Cancer are going to take the same course, right? That Taurus and Leo are going to take the same course.
Rise in the same place, culminate in the same place, and set in the same place. I love it. Man, this is so beautiful. What a great...
The image also, so what I'm doing is I'm looking in stellarium. It's the northern hemisphere. I'm looking south and just, watching the planets move. And the issue with the rainbow here too is I'm actually looking in 3 cardinal directions at once. I'm looking at south, but you can also see the east and the west on the screen. So it's like we have eyes on the side of our head, and even, you know, like bug eyes, and that's impossible. So you couldn't work the rainbow perfectly here, but you get the point. Like, so what we're looking at right now, the moon, it seems to be in late Capricorn. No, sorry, in Pisces there. And it's in like the purple bit of the rainbow. Sun is way up there in Cancer, and
midsummer.
Yeah, it's in the highest part of the rainbow. And we'll see Jupiter rise here, because this is now coming into the date, one of the dates of these parallels. And I'll circle where Jupiter rises on the eastern horizon. And then we'll see that Saturn rises in the exact same place. And then I'll circle where Jupiter culminates, and we'll see that Saturn culminates, and that Saturn sets where Jupiter sets there. And with this rainbow in here, it's just a little bit easier to see that they are taking that same exact arc through the heavens. And so this only happens for degrees of the zodiac that are conjunctions, or antiscia.
Yeah.
And parallel is actually because it also honors the latitude of the planets and the truth that the planets do not exist on the ecliptic plane. It's speaking, as does an occultation, of like a very strong type of conjunction, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But this conjunction is not a conjunction in time, right? It's a conjunction in space alone, like a conjunction when planets, and another image I should have shown is that the conjunction on December 21st, 2020 of Jupiter and Saturn in the first degree of tropical Aquarius, very tight. It's almost a Jupiter occultation of Saturn. It's not quite. But their declinations are so similar because they both have South Node in the tropical sign of Capricorn. But there's something here where I've looked at this and then looked at contraparallels, and we're out of time, so we won't go there. But a contraparallel, just like if Taurus is rising and Scorpio is setting, well, Taurus rises north of east, Scorpio sets south of west. In contraparallel signs, they have, even though they can be in signs next to one another like Virgo and Libra, they have that type of relationship where, like in that example, Virgo rises north of east and Libra sets south of west, right? So the parallels or the antiscia, they are like a conjunction, where the contraparallels or the contra-antiscia, they are like an opposition. And where I've seen
that. Do you have any parallels in your birth chart, bro?
I do.
Yeah, I was going to say you must, because I have Mars and Jupiter in parallel from Taurus to Leo, right? So there's that square that's not exactly a square because they have this similarity through this shared path, right? And the way I always thought of it is like, because I actually had an older brother who died when I was 3, and so I never knew him. And so I've always had this experience of these people who are a little further on the path than me. And they're always like, hey, kid, it's great to see you. And by the way, watch out for da-da-da up here, So it's like literally Jupiter goes, across the midheaven and he says, hey, Saturn, check it out, man. There's this, that, or the other, And that's sort of been my experiential way that I teach, the parallels is like they're on the same path, but they're, and they can sort of share information, even if though they aren't in the same place, like a conjunction,
Yeah. And this one particularly is so cool, because the chart goes both ways, right? The primary motion is moving from the east to the west, and the secondary motion planets move from the west to the east. Like Taurus is west of Aries in this way. And it's cool because Jupiter, in a sense, through the primary motion, is rising before Saturn, and Saturn, as we said, is like following in Jupiter's wake. But in Jupiter's like, check this out. Like, I'm going way out. I'm going on the quest. I'm going as far from the cardinal direction as possible. And Saturn, on the other hand, can be like, yeah, dude, I've been there. I was just there.
Like, hey, see this big river of stars that's between us? Like, right. Wait till you get on the other side of this river, yo.
Yeah, and you know what? I want to show that image really badly. And we kind of looked at that because this is a really cool thing about not only their coming conjunction, and I'll show that image real quick because we were speaking about how it's a near occultation between their planets. This is the conjunction of December 21st, 2020. 0 degrees, 29 minutes Aquarius for Jupiter and Saturn. And there it is, right? So I'll zoom in, but it's very close to an occultation.
Yeah, it's
as
really
you were
nice.
Saying, Gary, and I need to get to this.
It wasn't like that in 2020, man. I remember seeing it, and they were like, not in the same exact place.
Right, but we look here, and I kind of showed this in this animation. Jupiter and Saturn in this parallel right now, or in this antiscia year, Jupiter is west of the galactic center, and Saturn east of the galactic center. And we'll have times this year where we can see them like that in the sky, them surrounding this great, powerful place of the heavens. So we mentioned.
I'm so looking forward to some photography with that, man.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking forward to seeing your photos of that too. You know, I want to just maybe end. You asked if I have parallels in my chart, because let's bring this to people to explore this in their own nativities. I'm never afraid to share my chart because I've done it so much. But this is my nativity. It's October 24th, 75, 7:39 p.m. in Boston, Massachusetts, and we don't see parallels on the chart wheel. Now you can learn to see antiscia, and it's a really cool thing to see. So like I have a Gemini moon at 25 degrees Gemini, and the antiscia point to that is 5 degrees Cancer. So I have, because that's the reflection about the solstice axis, you see. I have Mars at 1.5 degrees Cancer. So it's really usually use 1 or 2 degree orbs for antiscia or for parallels. So we wouldn't say they are, but you can learn to look this way. Like Saturn in Cancer, 2 degrees, the antiscia point to that, because Leo is antiscia Taurus. The antiscia for my Saturn would be 27.5 degrees Taurus, and I can look up there and not see anything. It's really cool to learn those points, but you don't see parallels, and so we have the genius of tables and software. And if you open that business, what you do is just look on your planetary tables and look at the declinations, right? Or you can print out often like aspect lists that will do this for you as long as you put parallels on there. So yeah, Gary, I have Sun Uranus who are near conjunct, but they're much closer in parallel than they are even in zodiacal alignment.
You got several parallels going on there.
Yeah, and contrast. And I didn't know that, right? And so I really got into this. And I think you probably asked me about my parallels because you can assume that since I'm nuts for it right now.
Well, not just that, but I mean, you know, that experience that I had of somebody showing me something who was just a little bit further ahead on the path, and then turning around and looking back the other way and going, "Hey, dude, check out what this dude in front of me just told me," and like pass it on, right?
Yeah, so I'm gonna share 2 more things. One is I first learned about parallels not by name, but I was studying, and you can see a movie of mine on YouTube, which is crazy, and it's 3 hours and 33 minutes and 33 seconds. And it's called The Star Mysteries of DC, where I was exploring the way that in Washington, DC, they very intentionally aligned many of the temples and the streets to the rising of particular stars or the sun on certain dates. And what I found there is that because, like, for example, from the White House, you see Sirius rise over the Capitol building. But that also means, as I found, that from the Capitol building, you see Aldebaran set over the White House. And then it turns out, as I found the language later, that just means that these 2 stars in our time are contraparallel. But I had no idea about that, and I thought I was tapping into some super secret Illuminati.
I remember, you were like, dude, check it out. And I was like, well, yeah, you know.
right. It's like, oh, man, I found the secret astrology that's been kept by the society since Egypt. And you're like, hey, that's called parallel, rookie. You know, and so, but you know, that interest of ours that brings us into these mysteries, especially when we're actually witnessing it in nature, you know, or in the sky, or seeing how we've made these different temple alignments over time. It opens this side of our doctrine that it's wonderful, actually, I think, really to receive it before it was named.
And
so I don't even know.
That experience, man. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I'm glad you have that experience, and I'm glad that is something we share. And, you know, I'm glad, too, that, you know, you've kind of initiated me into how cool it is to take some pictures of these things. Because I would wake up at 4 a.m. to go see Venus, and
it takes a lot of dedication, man. And I was really happy to see you get that photo of the day on Earth sky. I think you're the only other astrologer I know, besides yours truly, who's done that. You know, and it's like, I think it's a really cool thing to be able to like show people who either, you know, they live in a really light polluted place or they're on a really strict schedule or whatever, and that they can still like get that experiential part of what we do. And so
Yeah, it's a gift, and just that image unlocks so much. But this would be a great place, I think, to get back to where we were about like not rushing and like not skipping 2019 to go to 2020. And it's this, that, I mean, with the camera, I love it, but sometimes I am like, I drop further into my practice and my awareness of the sky through the lens. But more often, and I require more self-discipline and training in this regard, it will take me out of my experience of the sky. I'm so busy trying to take a picture of what I'm experiencing that I don't experience.
Yeah, at the last Sky Astrology conference, I didn't get a lot of photos because I was so busy just being with people and being with the sky with people. I didn't get a lot of photos. I got a lot of photos on the way there and on the way back when I was by myself. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's difficult because, there's so much of the technical stuff that you need to adjust this and adjust that, and you can get stuck in your head and everything. But I think I like to that's why I like to get there early and leave late and just like make it a full, because you can get that part before, you can get the experiential part before. I mean, I remember, on the way to Sky Conference, I was at Devil's Tower, and I had set up the camera, so that looking due north, so that I had the North Star right over top of the, and like Cassie and the Dipper were like, doing this dance, and then afterwards, I'm like, I'm just gonna lay on my back, do that womb thing, lay on my back and check this out. And I remember that big tower kind of looming above me and feeling it as a consciousness, man, like a sentience. And I was just like, whoa, you're not going to get that when you're looking through a camera, right? Yeah.
Totally. That time you took to lay on your back. But see, you worked the plan, right?
And then I had time to play.
Yeah, you planned the work and then you played, right?
Exactly.
So one cool thing about night sky photography is the lens has to stay open for at least 20 seconds, 30 seconds. And so I'll set the thing and take the picture, and then it's just like, okay, now be in it and then go back. But just maybe taking that too far. But let that be for me a reminder and a metaphor to not try to take this picture of 2020 or 2021 now, and be here and experience this.
Experience that dynamic energy of these two great giants of timekeepers of the ages, on different sides of the river, camped out, right? What's that about, man? What can they say to each other on different sides of the river that they won't be able to say when they're both over here?
Yeah, so maybe later this year we can check in and reflect upon how this fantastic parallel has shown itself in the world without. Because, the other thing that I would love to talk to you about, not today, is how, I mentioned this briefly before, but Jupiter's in Sag and Capricorn, Sagittarius in their domiciles. They will meet in Saturn's house in Aquarius, traditionally speaking. And then there will be Jupiter in Pisces and Saturn in Aquarius, and their domiciles on the other side. But that time now, Saturn rising in Aquarius and Jupiter following in Saturn.
Oh, sounds like, now who's leading the show?
Right. And yet those signs, Aquarius and Pisces, are not antiscia, and therefore there cannot be a parallel. And in fact, at that time, from the Northern Hemisphere point of view, Jupiter will be above Saturn in a different perspective, right?
Interesting,
Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued by that. I've been looking at how that can only happen. We're in, this period of it. It can only happen when their meeting is either in Capricorn or Aquarius. Therefore, it only happens about every 800 years for short periods of time. So that'd be a fun thing for you and I to explore another time. But we've done so much. If you'll allow me, I'd love to leave with a couple of plugs or co-plugs.
Absolutely, please. Knock yourself out.
Yeah, man. So what a treat to be on here. And just all the time. Friends, this is a lot of what it looks like when Gary and I hang out in person. And so that's why we said let's do an hour today, and we went 2 hours. And it's let's go look at this conjunction. We end up coming back at 5 a.m, kind of because we have a lot of fun together, and we're always, you know, I think celebrating this great eternal learning with the goddess astrology. So,
yeah, and halfway between, you're like lining people up on the deck and going, okay, you're the sun, now you rotate around her, and do you see how you see it different over here?
yeah, and so, and we need to talk about this because there's some gossip that maybe Gary and I will do a bit of a star camp together in early July in Peninsula, Michigan, you know, under dark skies, because together we are both speaking at the Great Lakes Astrology Conference, which is the end of June and the beginning of July. Also, before then, I'm doing a star camp near Portland, Maine at the summer solstice. And that eventually will be written up on my website, which is morethan.astrology.com.
Is that literally going to be in Portland, Maine, or up further in the...
Yeah, just outside of Portland, Maine. We're still looking for the house to do it. But yeah, the solstice, and there's an occultation of Saturn by the moon on June 18th, which is visible on the East Coast. So I'm going to go out there and see that, and then lead some people through this curriculum that I'm developing of astronomy for astrologers.
Nice.
And just want to offer that, folks, you can find like 6 hours of free astronomy for astrologers lessons, like all these like crazy animations and video courses.
Incredible graphics. Could not more highly recommend something than that. And you went all out on that, man. I was blown away by how good that was.
Thanks, brother. Yeah, and the first 12 lessons are free. So go to morethan.astrology.com/free and enter your email, and I'll send you a bunch of stuff, including these lessons. And I'd love to see you there. But most importantly, you know, as a teacher, as you are, Gary, of the marriage of heaven and earth, as I like to say, like, all we are really doing is introducing people to the true teachers, which are the earth and the sky.
Absolutely.
And I'm so honored to be a messenger in that way, and to have been informed by the greats like Gary Caton and Adam Gainsbourg and Daniel Jamario and Kaylin Castell, and, you know, getting out there and being with the actual sky, even if it's just for an hour a week, friends, and going and being in awe and not needing to point your cell phone app at a star and a planet. Initially, just experience a star. You don't need to know who that star is by some Arabic name of old. What is that star's name to you? But just remember that everything is relationship, and we are more open, I think, in that experience of receiving the direct teachings from these sacred temples around the world and from the eternal sacred temple of the sky. And that's one of the potential and the invitations of Jupiter and Sagittarius of this great year 2019, which Gary called in a conversation with me recently the perfect foreplay for 2020. And the foreplay is all right, brother, thank you so much. It's wonderful to connect.
Oh, thank you, brother. Namaste, and well done, and fly away and be free.
All right, brother.
Don't forget to play.
All right. See you in space. Love you. Peace.